right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And this is Thanksgiving week, and you know what I'm thankful for? I'm thankful for cinema. That's right, we're here to talk about Martin Scorsese's new piece of true cinema, The Irishman, which of course we are very lucky to have seen in the theater because this is a Netflix movie and it is out today on Netflix. So if you didn't get to see it, if it didn't open in a theater near you, which it didn't for many, many people, and I really didn't expect it to open in Vegas, but I'm so glad it did. But if you didn't get to see it, go watch it now. It's out on Netflix, and then come back and listen to this wonderful conversation I had with returning co-host Kris Krainock. We had a great time talking about this one. And another thing you could do while you're at it is make sure you're subscribed to Piecing It Together on your podcast app of choice. You could also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts if you enjoy the show. And you can follow us on social media at Piecing Pod and join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where, believe me, the conversation about Martin Scorsese and Marvel and all that stuff came up many, many times over the last few months, but I'm sure it'll come up many more times in the coming months. But anyway, today is not about that. Today is about The Irishman. So let's jump into this conversation because this is a great movie. And, even if you don't love it, and we talk about this in the episode, but even if you don't love it, this is a movie worth discussing and diving into. And I had a great time talking puzzle pieces about it with Kris Krainock. So let's get into it. Today's episode is sponsored by the Golden Tiki. Recently named one of the top tiki bars in the United States by the Food Network, and also one of the top 10 best nightlife destinations in Las Vegas by USA Today. They've got great rum, mixed drinks, and of course the Dole Whip. They've got theme nights, DJs, all kinds of fun stuff, including Al and Bud's Oasis, who are two robotic parrots that put on a great show every hour on the hour. So next time you're in Las Vegas, make sure to check out the Golden Tiki on Spring Mountain. Kris Krainock is back with us again today. How's it going, man?
It's going excellent, thank you.
So, you saw The Irishman last night.
In theaters.
The way it was meant to be seen. Let's be real here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, Rian Johnson just said in an interview that it's a tragedy that Knives Out is opening in more theaters than The Irishman. And I got to agree with the man.
Yeah, no, I agree with that too. I mean, I think it's a really interesting time, especially to have a conversation about anything Scorsese, because there's everyone hates him or loves him now. Like all the filmmakers. It's been amazing watching these filmmakers that grew up watching him and then have him insult them. Kind of like a side. He didn't really insult them,
right?
Just how it's being perceived. And then watching them scramble and be like, it's, he's entitled to his opinion, has just been the best feeling in the world. I love these people. So yeah, everyone is rooting for him to be in theaters more, and it's shocking that he's not.
Yeah. And this is going to be an interesting conversation. We'll get into some puzzle pieces here in a second, but this movie is so just it's almost like an end cap for Scorsese in general, like his whole filmography. Like it really is kind of it's almost like an ending in a way,
Yeah.
And so it's kind of very singular in that. And I don't know that we'll necessarily have a lot of pieces. I've got a few. I don't know what you got, but it's definitely going to be a weird movie to talk about as far as the whole inspirations thing, I think.
Well, I mean, just as for a legendary filmmaker, there's only a handful of people that are still, I would say, legendary living among us.
Sure.
We've lost a lot of filmmakers within the last decade that were going back to the old, we had Ingmar Bergman up to 2007, excuse me. And so to have someone so self-assured and so confident in their voice, it's much easier to talk about a new director and being like, well, they were inspired by this movie, and this movie. But it's like, how do you really go into Scorsese, who is crafted such a genuine voice of his own that I definitely have things that I think he references, but in terms of the influence, they're almost invisible at this point,
right?
Because he's almost he's just so
he is the
articulate.
Influence.
Yeah, he's so articulate in his own vision and his own voice.
Yeah.
So this is probably the greatest director we've discussed. I mean, besides like Stanley Kubrick and like for breaking it apart, but that's a whole other different thing.
Sure,
So
sure.
this is just interesting to, and yeah, I'm excited to kind of see what you think.
All right.
But I'm still mixed. The movie is still penetrating me on a whole other level.
I completely understand. I left the theater thinking I definitely liked it. I don't know how much I like it, and it took me a few days to really just really dig into my thoughts and start to appreciate it for what it actually is. And I'm liking it more and more every day that I get past it.
Yeah, for me, my first reaction, I just saw it last night, so my first reaction is that, of course, it's good.
Right.
It's good. It's a great film. I mean, these are people at the peak of their powers. There's a certain confidence about it. There's a sure hand at the helm. Joe Pesci is as great as everyone is saying. I think he stole the show. I think Pacino really brought it. He's been kind of just being Pacino for like 20 years, and he actually shook off some cobwebs and really gave a more nuanced performance.
Yeah,
I think it lucked out that he was also a crazy guy that screams a lot. I think
well.
I think he got super lucky. But I think maybe the best piece of casting in the movie was Pacino as Hoffa. And even De Niro, who I think really oddly plays a diminished role as like the middleman of these two type of characters, these two worlds. He was the bridge between them. Was stellar. But it's strange, for great writing, great directing, and great performances, it kind of added up to a fairly average movie. My gut is saying to me that it isn't a masterwork as much as it is great people doing what they do well. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, and I don't want to ramble, but I have mixed feelings. We'll discuss it as we go through the puzzle pieces.
Beautiful. Why don't we jump into some of those? What do you got for your first one?
Okay, so I resisted reading reviews because I try to always do that, but I read one-line review which really stuck in my brain, and I have to agree with it even more now seeing it after the fact. I forget who it was, but someone said that The Irishman is basically wild strawberries with guns, which I thought was hilarious. So my first puzzle piece was going to be Ingmar Bergman's Wild Strawberries, the great, great Swedish masterpiece from 1957.
Okay, I have not seen it.
Okay, there's going to be a couple of those on here. So,
I'm sure.
So Wild Strawberries is a personal favorite film of mine. It resonates with me very much so. I always put it on my arbitrary top 10 list, which is always changing, except for like the bottom 3 or 4 or whatever. But it's always like number 3 on my list. So again, that's arbitrary. But it's a very deeply loved film for me. And it's about an old doctor who's driving through the Swedish countryside with his daughter-in-law on his way to receive a kind of like a lifetime achievement award. And he looks back on his life and he finds it full of regret and kind of a bittersweetness. And he's brought back to the simpler times of being able to pick wild strawberries on his like family summer home. And he remembers past loves, and he kind of almost is like a Scrooge character in a way, to where he's become embittered and cruel, and he's kind of lost some of his humanity, but he regains that on this journey, in subtle, very artistically, formative ways.
Absolutely,
so it's a great, great film.
Right on, yeah, and definitely that sounds very much like what we're dealing with here.
Well, that's the thing is you mentioned like. Not to get overly into a critique of The Irishman itself and get too far away from the puzzle pieces, but basically, like, I think I liked the film as a chapter in Martin Scorsese's story more than I liked it as an independent standalone film.
So that's an interesting thing, and like just as a brief aside, we'll try to keep it as brief as possible. I feel like I could say a fairly similar thing about his last few movies.
Yeah.
The Wolf of Wall Street, I don't like as a movie. I like as the idea of what he's doing.
Yeah.
What he's trying to do with the movie. But I would never really go back and watch that movie. Silence, also, like I like more. I love Silence.
I think it's a great film.
Yeah. But it's not really a movie that you're gonna recommend to quite anybody. It's a difficult watch,
Sure.
and it's like he's definitely working in things that are outside of just a generally enjoyable movie experience.
Well, I think Scorsese has actually always been that.
Sure.
I think that he's unique in that he's made movies that have resonated with the masses and have become part of our popular culture. But I think that was always like by accident.
Right.
I think his obsessions always have driven him, which is why we got Cape Fear remake, and he that's how he was able to make The Last Temptation of Christ, as if he like bargained and made this kind of like super commercial film, which ended up being bizarre and terrifying in its own right. But like he was always driven by his personal passions, and I think he just kind of stumbled into making films that defined a genre. I mean, besides The Godfather, when you think of mafioso movies of Italian Americans, all you think of is Goodfellas and Casino.
Sure.
They have become the staple. So I think in a way, The Irishman is serving to go back to that preconceived notion about himself as a filmmaker. It's almost a revisiting, kind of like how Paul Schrader recently revisited Taxi Driver with First Reformed.
Yes.
I that's what I mean is like I like that Scorsese wanted to go back and try again and add another dimension.
Yeah.
And I think next to The Irishman, Goodfellas almost seems kind of glib. Like it's this kind, you know what I mean? It's not as, it's very deep. It's a masterful, almost nearly perfect crime film. But I think Scorsese was going for like some of that silence gravity.
Yes.
Mixed with this genre that he's been linked to.
Yeah.
That I don't think he himself identifies with.
Right.
He identifies with The Last Temptation of Christ and Silence. These are his passion films. These are who he is
Even
as a
Hugo.
filmmaker. And Hugo.
Yeah.
And then we've just said, no, you're the mafia guy.
Yeah, right.
You are the Goodfellas guy. And so, yeah, I mean, The Irishman is interesting and great as a chapter in his story more than I think as a standalone movie.
Makes perfect sense. And you just mentioned First Reformed with Paul Schrader. That's going to be my first puzzle piece. So, yeah, I think exactly what you were just saying, though, that Paul Schrader got to go back to this idea he was exploring, all those years ago. And, of course, Martin Scorsese being a part of that project as well, but with Taxi Driver. But, yeah, the idea of getting to go back to a similar idea, but with your newfound experiences in life and new point of view on it and everything like that. I think that this movie very much so is Martin Scorsese looking at the gangster film genre with this newfound point of view.
Yeah, with a new philosophical eye.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's funny because First Reformed is almost like beat for beat Taxi Driver, but it's somber.
Right.
And I think what that film also has in common with The Irishman is that they're somber pieces.
Yeah. It comes with age.
Yeah, I think there's a kind of a relaxing to it getting older. You know what I mean? You kind of calm down. I mean, and Scorsese famously was like this erratic cokehead. You know what I mean? And a lot of his great films was like made by this like blazing energy. And he still is kind of like a little puppet. He's like he's hilarious as a human being. But yeah, there's kind of this somber, mature attitude with The Irishman, and I'm still grappling. Like, I love long movies. And there is, as to quote Roger Ebert, there's no good film long enough, and there's no bad film short enough.
Sure.
So if you earn 3.5 hours, I'm in. You know what I mean? I have no like weird prejudice against it. But I also think the longer you make a film, the more you're daring us to say, well, is this earned?
Right.
Like, I sit here for 3.5 hours? And I'm still kind of grappling with the idea of like, is this maturity? It was basically, in a nutshell, was this too long-winded? Like, did we need 3.5 hours of Robert De Niro pensively thinking to himself, quietly?
Right.
And I don't know. Is there a more potent and effective 2-hour film in there? So there's all kinds of questions. But yeah, to me, the film was meditative.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of what maybe Scorsese was rationalizing the runtime, is he like wanted to meditate on these people.
Absolutely.
I don't know if the meditation was really all that profound. You get old and you die, and
that's exactly right. Well, that's exactly right, and that's why I think it works if you are taking that step back and looking at it within the confines of his entire career, like applying this movie to his career. As a standalone movie, maybe not as much. Maybe it didn't need to be what it is, but for the career arc, I think it makes so much sense.
Sure. Wild Strawberries in 90 minutes makes so much more of a profound statement about age and regret and bitterness. He was in and out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? These, Bergman didn't mess around. He was, 90 minutes, boom, messed you up. It was like reading The Stranger, and like Camus' The Stranger. It's 100 pages, and it will fuck you up. You'll just like be in bed for a week after you read it. And that's how Bergman was. So yeah, I don't know if the meditative quality lended itself particularly well. I'm still grappling with my feelings. I'm still sifting the pieces of the movie and how I feel about it. Of course, it's impressive, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, what do you got for your next piece?
So I'm going to bring up, just while we're on the subject, and I'll keep it super brief this time. It's called Umberto D. It's a superb Italian neorealist masterpiece by De Sica. And it's about an old man living in poverty in post-war Italy who basically all he has is his dog. I bring this up in particular because in The Irishman, a particular scene takes place in a restaurant called Umberto's. And so I think this was Scorsese's overt nod to a film about age. You know, it's like Umberto D is like one of the great films about old people. You know what I mean? It's like if you ever look up old people movies on Google, probably the first thing that come up would be Umberto D. And it's a truly powerful film. It's sentimental without being sentimentalist. And I think that was Scorsese's other thing with this, is that it's so frank. To use a bad pun of the main character's name, but it was I mean, all the violence was not sensationalized in the slightest.
Yeah,
it was extremely brief and fierce and realistic and undramatized, and I think that harkens back directly to the Italian neorealist movement, which was the whole idea of the Italian neorealist was like, well, let's stop glorifying life and putting these glossy filters on the women. You know, it was kind of a defiance to Hollywood of the 1930s. Because of the war. I mean, Europe in general, but also Italy was kind of raped by fascism. And the artist movement of the Italians were like, well, let's get back to basics and let's make movies about real people and poverty and suffering and bleakness. And so it's very philosophical. But I think that whole idea is very much in the bones of The Irishman and even in its stylistic approach. And then we definitely are confirmed with that because of the restaurant name of Umberto's.
I love that little Easter egg in there.
There you go.
Well, obviously I've not seen Umberto D, but I think a lot of the things you were, I know, he's shaking his head at me, by the way, everybody.
I'm not giving a very good radio, I'm just shaking my head slowly.
Holding his coffee and just shaking his head disappointingly. But the things you were saying though about the not really showcasing the violence and all that kind of stuff as a perfect lead into my next puzzle piece, which is Lynn Ramsey's "You Were Never Really Here" from 2017, which again it shows the effects of violence without actually showing much of the violence. They, she made a very distinct choice to shy away from the majority of it. I mean, there's a few scenes in there where we do, get that violence, but really the point of the movie is the character and the effects of it. And I think that there's a definite parallel with the way that it's showing that, violence has kind of marked this guy's life, but where's anything gotten him is basically nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, You Were Never Really Here is also virtually a revisiting of Taxi Driver.
Absolutely.
And I feel like Paul Schrader as a writer who was putting these ideas into the world, and then Scorsese who was kind of picking them up and reimagining them cinematically, they were really trying. I mean, comes back to this whole, crazy fiasco of Scorsese's comments about cinema, how he identifies cinema as trying to probe the inner spirit and soul and identity and philosophy of the characters. And you don't get that with Robert Downey Jr. in a big robot suit.
You're right.
But, that's the thing is, I feel like someone like Frank Sheeran, the character of Irishman, and the character of You Were Never Really Here, and of Taxi Driver, Travis Bickle, they're all numbed by trauma in a way, and they're all victims in a way, not to ever excuse their behavior, but I think there's a paradox in the core of all these characters. Like, with Frank, I almost said Ed Sheeran. With Ed Sheeran,
that's an Irishman.
That's a really great slip up. Imagine Ed Sheeran in The Irishman.
Oh,
that'd make it a better movie. Give me that other. Let's do 4 hours of Ed Sheeran. No, so anyway, with Frank Sheeran, he was a murderer as a World War II soldier. He murdered people.
Sure.
And he started to become that cold, calculated, calloused person in a whole other different context. And so I think it's important to show those things. So yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if there's a lot there to unpack, but that might be the point, that these people are empty and hollow.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think all these films that we've talked so far, especially the Schrader influenced or the Scorsese inspired, or those films in themselves, are about empty people that don't feel what we're quote unquote supposed to feel.
Yeah.
Even at the end with the priest and the Irishman, he's like, "Do you feel remorse?" And he's like, "No."
Yeah. He's like, "No."
How much has he changed, really?
Yeah.
So.
Well, what do you got next?
So my next one is going to be Rashoman. I'm going out. We're going all kinds of world cinema here. Sorry, guys. Sorry, listeners. You're like, but so this is an Akira Kurosawa film, and probably one of the most influential films of all time, besides being a great film in its own right. But in terms of Japanese cinema, it's and it's now become just a world staple. Because of the unreliable narrator, the idea of seeing one story from different perspectives, has now permeated basically the whole genre type. And with this, we have this really unique approach. I mean, I guess unique is one way to put it. Kind of predictable is another way to put it. If you look at Scorsese's catalog, it's kind of like, oh, there he is doing his Scorsese thing. You know what I mean? But you have the film being told from Frank's memory.
Right.
And the source material of the movie, I Heard You Paint Houses, the original book, is all conjecture.
Exactly. Yeah. Nobody has any clue.
Nobody. Yeah. So I feel like the Rashoman influence is definitely conscious. I don't think Scorsese was unaware of what he was doing, because he's such a cinephile.
Yeah.
And such a student of literature and a proponent of restoring these films, and he's very present in them. And I feel like he took that device and gave it to the Frank Sheeran character. And we never even know who he's talking to. And he's not talking to the camera. It's not a fourth wall break.
I love that about the movie, by the way. I love the opening, like where you just, I mean, is he just some old guy just talking to himself? Like, you really don't know.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a dementia element that they kind of play on.
Yeah.
Not overtly.
Sure.
But I definitely think this was kind of like a simplified, realistic Rashoman.
Well, spoiler alert for Friday's episode of Knives Out, but guest Jay Ledbetter brings up Rashoman for that one.
Get out of here.
This is Rashoman week on the podcast.
Well, that's the thing. It's one of those movies, I'm going to say it, like 2001: A Space Odyssey, that basically is everything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Rashoman's one of those movies that, like, it's not even fair that I brought it up, really, because it's just a puzzle piece to everything. We could talk about Iron Man 3, and I'd be like, have you seen Rashoman? All right, so...
Love it. I love it. Well, I'll go with my next one. When people started asking me what I thought of The Irishman after I saw it in the theater a couple weeks ago, the first thing I said was it reminded me of binge watching 6 episodes of Boardwalk Empire.
Yeah.
This is absolutely that Scorsese feel with that real life narrative with the gangster stuff and with the real life criminals, and then, added to it is the fact that you get so many little roles being filled by Boardwalk Empire actors. Of course, the big draw is the main 3, the Pacino, the De Niro, the Pesci. But then on top of that, you got, what's his name, Stephen Graham. You've got Bobby Cannavale. Who else was in this? That was in Boardwalk Empire. There's a lot of people from Boardwalk Empire that are filling out a lot of the smaller roles in this thing, and it kind of just feels like a reunion of sorts,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree. Boardwalk Empire was created by a guy named Terrence Winter, who actually brings me to my puzzle piece, if I can kind of horn in on yours a little bit to just expand on yours.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to have to say The Sopranos. And Terrence Winter was one of the head writers, or one of the key writers, I should say. Pardon me. David Chase was always the head writer on Sopranos, but one of the key writers of The Sopranos, and really helped define its voice. And Boardwalk Empire was born out of the success of The Sopranos, and it was kind of a follow-up. Now, funnily enough, with The Sopranos, they asked Scorsese if he had watched it, and he was like, "No, I can't really. I know those guys. I did that stuff. I was in that genre, and I just don't want to deal with it. I don't want to look into it." I've always been suspicious of that response. I don't know I think he probably did watch it, is my guess. This is totally a guess, though. I have no idea. I have no inside information at all. But the thing is, here's one of the reasons also that I feel slightly undersatisfied or unsatisfied by The Irishman is that The Sopranos added the philosophical dimension to the mafia genre that I think this film was attempting to do, and it did it better, and it did it smarter, and it did it deeper. And I think it's because it had 6 years of sprawling content to do that.
Yeah, if you're going to deal with the effects of this lifestyle and all that stuff, I mean, you need time. And maybe that's part of the reason why this is 3.5 hours long.
I think it is too, but the thing is, I've been railing on this recently. I think I even might have mentioned this like in our last Dr. Sleep episode, is that I'm like big on the medium. The appropriateness of the medium.
Right.
And I don't know if The Irishman is a story that needed 3.5 hours more than it needed 3 years. Because they say with The Sopranos that it's about the banality of evil.
Mm.
You know, how many times do you watch Tony Soprano get up in his bathrobe and get his newspaper? And it's these repetitious images of life that we see over and over again, juxtaposed next to him shooting an 18-year-old kid in the face or something. And that's the thing is, I get that sense watching The Irishman. It's like De Niro counting his medication and putting it in the little divider for the week and knocking over his pills. And it's like, this is a guy that shot Jimmy Hoffa in the face, and now we're watching him count his medication.
Yeah.
And again, it was echoing of this banality of evil, that life goes on, that he gets old. The gimmick of showing writing in text on the screen of how everyone died.
Yeah.
That was, again, it was a clever Scorsese-ish way, kind of clumsy at the same time though, of being like, everyone dies. This is how they go. This is not a glamorized life. Like, he spent his early life glamorizing these things.
Right.
And that's unfair. It's up to the audience to know that he's not glamorizing it.
Yeah.
He himself was not making it glamorous. He himself was showing it from the perspective of the people who thought it was glamorous.
Right.
And then it was our responsibility to know.
Let's be clear. I mean, maybe he did a better job with like Goodfellas and stuff, but let's be clear. Most people think Wolf of Wall Street is glamorizing that life.
Right. That's the thing is, like, I read not to get on. Like, I know we're tangent prone, but basically, super quickly. I was reading about Wolf of Wall Street because there's all kind of controversy around it, and so many people were disgusted by the film.
Yeah,
because they thought it was supporting it.
Yeah,
and the thing is like, I've always felt, it's at the end of Wolf of Wall Street, he shows the main character doing that kind of like talk of like, inspiring other people to be like him and sell me the pen and all that. It's not Scorsese's job as the artist to tell us that we should be disgusted.
Right.
He's showing us how this guy came out clean on the other side. Mm-hmm. And shouldn't that infuriate us?
Right, exactly.
So that's the thing is, we should, we never take enough responsibility as an artist, or as an audience, pardon me. And the artist should only present things as they are, with a grain of truth to them. And then it's up to us to have a reaction.
Absolutely.
And so I feel like with Goodfellas, he was showing us from Henry Hill's perspective. Yeah. And in a way, Irishman was even less artistically sound, in the sense that he was giving us more breadcrumbs to how we should feel.
Right.
He was taking freedoms away. I'm just using strong language to illustrate a point. Obviously, I respect the man immensely, and he's a great artist.
Of course.
But I'm just using these strong words to just describe it properly. But basically, he was taking away breadcrumbs for us to arrive at the destination. That the life of crime is hollow and empty and meaningless, and that they think they're getting away with something by not paying taxes or being able to fix things or having this this power, and it's just this big masturbatory bullshit thing until they fucking die like everyone else, and it's not special. And so The Irishman is basically less creatively sound in a way, or less artistically sound than his earlier films, which you could argue were glamorizing it. So have that twist your brain for a while.
Twisting it around, absolutely. Well, I'm going to stay in TV for my next piece, which our last couple pieces were. This is just the whole genre of the recent explosion of true crime. I think that this is, and my next piece will also deal with this as well, but it's just like a perfect time for a movie on Jimmy Hoffa, because people are just obsessed with just digging deep into these crazy stories, these crazy true life crime stories. And it's so big on television right now. And I think that excitement around that genre is something that made this a good time for Scorsese to go and look at that guy's life,
Yeah, it makes it watchable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it's why people, love serial killers.
Yeah.
And one time I went over to a girl's house and she had a book of serial killers on her coffee table, and I was like, I don't know if I should be with this woman. Like, I don't know, this is concerning. And that's the thing is, like, but we all have this kind of sick fascination with that kind of stuff. And I think especially with the mugginess around how far this went with Hoffa and the presidency and the assassination of JFK, and how the mob was instrumental in that, and the Bay of Pigs and this and that. And the movie very cleverly sidesteps exactly what happens.
Sure.
While also being very meticulous in its information.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to be, again, that's the mastery of this type of filmmaker. Like, when you ask, like, what's the difference between a Scorsese and like some new director kind of just getting his feet wet or her feet wet? And it's that like the confidence to navigate a complicated story with such clarity.
There's a lot of confidence on display in this movie.
I think so.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether you love it or not, I mean, this is a film, you know?
This is a film. This is
Yeah.
a great film in a lot of abstract and academic ways.
Yeah.
Does it connect? Does it hit on all the levels emotionally? Is it as good as it could have been? There's all kinds of weird questions that are subjective, but yeah, it's still a great, masterful piece of material. Everyone
Absolutely.
involved is at their top of their game.
Absolutely.
And it kind of brings me to my other puzzle piece,
Sure.
which is kind of I'm going to connect two.
Okay.
And to keep time, time is sensitive. JFK by Oliver Stone.
Sure.
And Hoffa with Jack Nicholson and Danny DeVito, of course. And I'm going to put those in as a companion to your puzzle piece because there was kind of a boom in the 90s of like courtroom dramas, of recent history films. And I think it's because Oliver Stone was really hot and he started this. He did the great Nixon with Anthony Hopkins, which is like a 4-hour mess, but I can't take my eyes off of it. It's so brilliant and terrible all at once. But JFK in particular, because of rewriting of history, or basically making a movie based on assumptions.
Sure.
JFK is a bunch of horseshit, and it's so good though. And
right.
I'm not it's so good. Yeah. I'm not a big Oliver Stone a fan. I think he's a real hit and miss type director, but when he was great, he was great. He has a real, and I think he has kind of a kitchen sink approach that Scorsese doesn't have.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Scorsese, especially now in The Irishman, is much more reserved, as we've said, and controlled.
Yeah.
But JFK and Hoffa are these big, sprawling, complicated historical movies that were made basically on people's obsessions more than they were made on fact.
Right.
And I think The Irishman shares that.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, I hadn't really thought of JFK going into it, but I mean, it makes so much sense. Everything you're saying, it's kind of perfect.
Yeah, they're like identical movies, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's one of those things, like, I really doubt highly that Scorsese sat down and watched JFK before getting, in pre-production of this movie. But it goes into our brains, especially for someone who watches so many films as Scorsese does. He's still such an active participant as a viewer.
Yeah.
And I think that Oliver Stone is very responsible for changing the landscape of what we expect out of our true crime or historical fictions.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think Oliver Stone is heavy-handed on the fiction side more than he is on the historical side.
Sure.
And his movies are really more about him
mm-hmm.
than they are about history. I watch Oliver Stone films and they're very myopic. Yeah. They're his obsessions. He's burning himself to the ground with his passions.
Yeah.
And those are what his films are really about, more so than the historical, thing that he's interested in at that given moment.
Sure.
They're very naked in that way.
Mm.
And I think Scorsese, again, another similarity with these movies is that The Irishman is very naked. It feels like Scorsese is saying something to us.
Right.
More than he's disappearing into the movie.
Interesting. I like it. Well, I am going to go with a piece that is not a movie, but it again talks to why I felt like this was the right time for a movie like this. And it is Bernie Sanders and his political revolution. Just the idea that there's this politician out there right now that just speaks to the people, especially like, unions and mm-hmm. all that stuff. I think that I'm not a big history buff, so I didn't really know that much about Hoffa outside
mm-hmm.
of the disappearing politician guy.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but as I was watching, I was like, oh my God, like this is basically like the way that people feel about Jimmy Hoffa seem to be what people feel about Bernie right now. People are super just excited about the political process, you know?
Well, it's on the other side, on the ugly side of that same coin.
Mm-hmm.
It's why people connect with Trump.
Absolutely.
Because they wrongly interpret him as a straight talker.
Yes.
Obviously nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah.
But they view him as someone that speaks at their level.
Absolutely.
That he cuts through the fat.
Yeah.
And that's what Bernie does, in a way. So yeah, I mean, unfortunately, politics, in order to work, here's another paradox for you. It needs to be simplified for people to emotionally invest in it and actually care. But unfortunately, politics isn't emotional and it isn't simple.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have real politicians trying to discuss the complexities of it, people tune out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And and that's everyone's fault and no one's fault.
Right.
I mean,
It's just what it is.
Yeah, if it's a dry, boring documentary, no one's gonna watch it. If you punch it up with some drama, people are gonna watch it. It's just our nature.
Yeah.
So it's this other paradox of just endless struggle and confusion and frustration.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, Hoffa had the charisma.
Yeah.
And Bernie has this charisma. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of, not to get into political conversation, but the establishment will probably never let Bernie go beyond. You never know.
Absolutely.
Fingers crossed, but
Yeah.
probably not.
No.
But when I think about it, the only person who I could actually see taking on Trump would be a Bernie.
Absolutely.
Because he actually connects to us on an emotional level.
That's why I think that everything is hopeless. But
Yeah.
let's not go too deep.
Which is
into
why
that
we
rabbit
should
hole.
just seek out movies like The Irishman and watch them and go into our own.
That's a good way to plan. Use up the rest of our time on this planet.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we move on? What do you got for your next piece?
So this is a super fast one. I'm just going to mention it because it's another Easter egg in the movie.
Okay.
In the background on a marquee for a movie theater
Mhm.
is a movie called The Shootist. And it's a John Wayne film.
Mhm.
And I just want to touch on it briefly because it's obviously an Easter egg that Scorsese put in there. I doubt it was an accident. And again, it's about the aging process. It's about it's almost about like re-examining a genre. In this way, it's going to be the Western.
Yeah.
And with The Irishman, it's the mob. It's the Italian-American mob crime epic. So The Shootist and The Irishman are both kind of like postmodern reimaginings of a genre.
Okay.
And so Shootist is a unique little, kind of an underloved movie. Another reason why I think that Scorsese probably put it in there, because he's influenced by it, but it's also he wanted the nerds in the audience to go seek it out if they haven't
Sure.
seen it,
Yeah.
So we could always rely on stuff like that. And of course, I noticed it and was very happy to see that. So yeah, similar in that way. And I think maybe mainly in its intention,
Mm-hmm.
taking a new look at this genre that I think Scorsese is probably bored with.
Right. Right.
Because another thing, I was a little bored. I was a little bored in The Irishman.
Well, we've
because-
seen
yeah.
so much
Yeah.
mafia stuff like over the years.
Yeah, one, Scorsese already did it the same way and did it brilliantly. And then I feel like The Sopranos swooped in and did the dimension that The Irishman's attempting to do, but just much more thoroughly.
Yeah.
So in a way, I was kind of like going through the beats.
Yeah.
In a way, I felt his boredom.
Well, that the idea of we've talked about this already in this conversation. The idea of that this is a continuation of things that he was exploring back in his earlier, mafia and crime movies and stuff like that. And then I think I mentioned at one point about this being about the Frank Sheeran story and showing him at the end and showing how, kind of pathetic it is, his old age and all, and we all die and all that kind of stuff. This being a final chapter.
Kind of dime store philosophy.
Yeah.
In my opinion. That's what Orson Welles would call dime store philosophizing. But go on. Okay.
Well, I only have one more puzzle piece. Okay.
Okay.
And this one is very ridiculous. I want to just say that up front. Okay. But, and I was almost not going to bring it up, but everybody likes to joke about how I tend to bring up Evil Dead too much in these podcasts.
I don't know what it's like to bring up something too much.
You're right. I know.
So I can't relate to you with that.
Well, okay, so bear with me. So I look at this movie in a lot of ways as you get more of the mafia stuff that he's been known for all these years, but then you tack on the end. You tack on the end of the life. You tack on what they never show you after the credits roll in the other movies of just being this old, sad man who's just, a life of regret and, all that stuff never brought him anything. So this is totally different. However, Evil Dead 2, okay, takes the original Evil Dead, which in this case is like your Goodfellas or whatever, you know, and adds the ending. What happened after the end of Evil Dead? Of course, it goes in wackiness and he cuts his arm off and starts fighting with the chainsaw.
It's brilliant, yeah.
Yeah, there's all kinds of crazy
It's a
stuff
masterpiece,
happens. It's the best movie ever. But I'm just talking about the fact that we are continuing those stories, and it's not a direct sequel, of course, but it's continuing the idea of those stories. And so I just thought of that idea of the fact that Evil Dead 2 is a remake and then a continuation in one movie.
Yeah, it's a reboot sequel.
Yeah.
It was doing it. Sam Raimi was ahead of the curve by like 30 years.
Right.
By doing what we now do with everything on the world, on the planet.
Yes, everything is that.
That everything is that now.
Yeah.
He was doing Shaft 2017 or 2019 and Shaft 2005 30 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
So no, I think it's a great puzzle piece.
Yeah, and it's a little out there, but
any chance to talk about it. Any chance to talk about it. I'm the right dude for that because I have The Shining on it. No, I'm just kidding. No, I don't. I promise. No, but it's funny. So I have one last puzzle piece, and it's always I always do this. It's a little bit of a cheat. It doesn't really count in my opinion, but I'm going to mention it anyway. Because to me, it's a combo, and we've kind of already touched on this, but of Scorsese's own Casino and Scorsese's own Silence. And I wanted to just bring it up for a unique reason, not that we've already talked about. You mentioned that it's like Casino, or it's like his earlier films with a new ending tacked on.
Yes.
And I think that's very much the case in terms of merging these two films together. It's like the somberness and the philosophy of silence mixed with the story, the plot of Casino and these people. But I think the thing I want to really talk about is that like most great films, and films like, Kubrick's movies that always had a reevaluation. I mean, they were always mixed upon coming out, and then years later they were considered masterpieces. It always like they became clearer in hindsight. And I think after the fog subsides of The Irishman, of maybe what my expectations were, or what people were saying about it, or this particular feeling in this moment, or his Marvel comments flavoring my feel, whatever.
Yeah.
I think when the fog clears and some time passes, The Irishman might be another movie like Casino, which we appreciate more now.
Right.
Because when Casino came out, everyone was like, just doing Goodfellas again, huh? Huh, Marty? Run out of ideas? And then, I mean, there's even like a famous SNL sketch. I feel it's like David Spade pops into my mind. He was just like, if you want to see the sequel to Goodfellas, go see Scorsese's Casino.
Yeah.
And now if you watch Casino, it is a masterpiece unto itself.
Sure.
It is a superb movie. It may even be better than Goodfellas. I don't know. They're so different, and they're so brilliant, and they're so masterfully done. And so yeah, I think with Irishman, we may be victims of being in its own time.
Right.
And I think as time moves on and we see Scorsese continue to work, and the hype dies down, and we go back when we catch Irishman on Netflix weirdly, and we watch it again and we think about it, it's gonna morph and change. I think
absolutely.
To me, it's either gonna become less substantial, and it's gonna become kind of or it's going to become a giant and a masterpiece.
Absolutely.
And I'm not sure which yet.
Well, that piece and that what you were just saying about it really makes me think you're the perfect person for a special episode of the podcast that I want to record later next month. So we'll talk about it after we finish recording.
Ooh, are you guys titillated?
I hope everybody is titillated. Let's do the finished puzzle, and we'll get into some closing thoughts. Finished puzzle includes Wild Strawberries, First Reformed, Umberto D, You Were Never Really Here, Rashoman, Boardwalk Empire, The Sopranos, True Crime TV, JFK, Hoffa, Bernie Sanders, The Shootist, Evil Dead 2, Casino, and Silence. My first closing thought I wanted to bring up. Friend of the show, Sean Fallon, who was just on our Ford v Ferrari episode, mentioned to me, we were talking about this movie, and he mentioned if he was going to be on this podcast, Barry Lyndon as a puzzle piece.
Oh, for sure.
And I know how much you love that movie. What do you think of that?
Well, Barry is my all-time fave. You know that. I know a disgusting amount about Barry Lyndon, and I think it's actually Scorsese's favorite Kubrick film.
Yeah.
And Kubrick was a giant to Scorsese, and Scorsese famously said that Kubrick's movies were the equivalent of 10 of anyone else's. So he held him in ultimate esteem. I'm not sure what the other host or the other friend of the show, why he said that. I could only imagine its length. That I think it's a breathing story. It's a film that unfolds slowly. I feel the characters. I agree in the sense that both characters are very passive. Barry and Frank are passive characters.
Right.
The world of The Irishman happens to Frank.
Right. That's
And-
what I was kind of thinking was the angle.
Yeah, and the world of Barry Lyndon happens to Redmond.
Mhm.
He almost falls into becoming Barry Lyndon.
Mhm.
And only a few times does he ever take the initiative to just become an opportunist.
Mhm.
He's almost, it's funny, I was speaking with the wonderful Douglas Milsom, the cinematographer on Full Metal Jacket, who's becoming the cinematographer of my film with much amazing honor to me, of course.
Mhm.
And we're talking about Barry Lyndon. And I have a great anecdote to where Doug was like, you know what? Ryan O'Neal was so miscast. And I was like, are you out of your mind? I was like, he was a mannequin. And he looked at me and he was like, he was a mannequin. And I was like, did I just change Doug's mind about Barry Lyndon, the man who worked on the film?
Wow.
So basically what happens is, we look at Barry Lyndon, which is weirdly looked at as an adventure film, which I think that's how they categorize it, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
It is not. It is a period drama. But it's so somber and so slow moving because the character himself is just wandering through the world.
Mhm.
And I think that's what Frank is. So yeah, in many ways, I agree with your friend, and I should have named it as I try to not put Kubrick on there.
I
So
know, right?
that your audience didn't just vomit when they heard my name.
Chris is back. God
Son
damn
of a
it.
bitch. But I can definitely see the comparison, and I definitely think Scorsese, in every moment he exists, is influenced by Kubrick. So for sure.
All right. Any other closing thoughts?
No, I'm not really. I basically wrapped it up in that we need to give this movie time. I think I personally do. Like, I liked it. Of course, it was good. It was good. It's like I said, it was these people at the top of their powers.
Yeah.
The elegance and the sure-handedness and the and the confidence is visible right there on the screen. Pesci was a revelation.
Oh, he's great.
And I think what's funny is Pesci's performance is also symbolic of the film itself, totally understated.
Mm-hmm.
The power is coiling within, not especially next to the comparison to his previous Scorsese roles, which is the extrovert, the loud, crazy, erratic one. So where now he's this coiling, powerful force with kindness.
Yeah.
So interesting character, and I think that's symbolic of the movie. So yeah, I think the greatness of the film is to be determined.
Mhm.
I think people who are loving it right out of the gate might be doing so because they feel subconsciously that they're expected to. This was not a film that left me floored with my mouth agog.
Sure, yeah.
It was a movie that left me very contemplative.
Yeah.
So I'm not to discredit anyone's feelings. If they loved it, I'm happy for that. But I definitely think it's more complex than that.
Absolutely.
And the quality of the movie in its totality,
Mhm.
I think we need some distance from it to really judge that objectively. As of right now, though, I think it's a worthy kind of bookend to, not that he's finished by any means, but it's definitely a good quote unquote ending to Scorsese, or at least this facet of his identity.
Absolutely. Makes total sense.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. I think that about does it. Chris, do you have another movie you saw recently you'd like to recommend?
No. Don't see Dr. Sleep. Check out Parasite and have a complex feeling on that. Try to resist everyone telling you that it's perfect.
Yeah.
And go see Jojo Rabbit and also be confused.
Okay.
So, and then I have yet to see the Ferrari movie.
Ford v Ferrari.
Yeah, Ford
Pretty
v Ferrari.
great.
Oh,
Pretty
yeah.
fun.
Yeah, it looks like a crowd pleaser.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm really getting into Christian Bale's aloof, like dead eyes. I think his dead eyes are like the best performance. I think his eyes should win an Academy Award this year.
His eyes knock it out of the park. In
Yeah,
this one,
they're
man.
dead.
Yeah.
He's the most vacant, terrifying sociopath of a human being I've ever looked at, and I just love. I mean, it's just he lives his characters in ways that Marlon Brando did. So I've yet to see it, but I'll see it for him.
Awesome.
And I went, goddamn Matt Damon with his performance. I don't know. Just the trailer cracks me up.
You can't. Crowds love Matt Damon.
How do you not love him?
Yeah.
I was willing to watch him get shrunk down in a movie by Alexander Payne and sit through that.
Yeah.
And so I'll follow him to the ends of the world. But I'd like to just become his friend, and then after 13 or 14 years, lean over and be like, "Stop making movies, Matt. You deserve a break.
You don't have to make.
You don't have to make him anymore. Just stop." And then he'd be like, "You know what? You might be right." And then I would save American cinema. No, I'm just kidding. I really love him. He's great.
Speaking of making movies, why don't you tell people where they can find you and your work?
Okay. So I am currently making a film, as I grossly plugged earlier, with the fantastic support of Douglas Milsom, the cinematographer of Stanley's Full Metal Jacket and all of his movies since, well, not as DP, but focus puller and very important camera operator all the way from Clockwork Orange in 1971, so it's a deep honor. Movie's called Madam X. You go to madamxmovie.com and you can get updates about the film and see the rest of our amazing cast and crew. We're still finding some important cast members and trying to raise some money. So if you guys are any millionaires and Kubrick fans and you guys want to make a movie with me, you can always come and do that. That'd be fun.
Cool.
You go to kriskrainock.com and you can see all of my previous work and all the things that I'm working on and read awful poems that I wrote when I was 17 and just develop a deep hatred for me. And so I'm around.
Beautiful. Well, as always, great having you on, man.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me back so soon. I'm happy someone canceled.
Hi, this is Wax Trax Records here on 2909 South Decatur. We buy all your old 45s, your old albums, any type of music memorabilia. Also, we sell music memorabilia, albums, CDs, and a lot. Come on down to Wax Trax, 2909 South Decatur, or give me a call at 702-362-4300. Thank you very much.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about The Irishman. Thanks to Kris Krainock for joining me for that, as I had a great time talking about it. And thank you to Maya Cinemas and Eclipse Cinemas for actually having The Irishman here in Las Vegas. Those two theaters, they have been doing a great job of bringing these things to Vegas. They brought El Camino, they brought Roma. Well, Maya brought Roma last year, and it's it's great that these movies, which I know we're all so happy that Netflix keeps making movies and funding movies that supposedly wouldn't have gotten made. I think that's kind of bullshit, but that's another story for another time. But as long as they're getting made, I do want to see them in the theater, and I'm so happy that these theaters are bringing them to Las Vegas, because otherwise we've got Regal and we've got AMC and we've got Cinemark, and they don't seem to want anything to do with these movies, and for kind of good reason. But as long as somebody's willing to bring them here, I'm really happy, because that's how I want to see a movie, especially a movie from Martin fucking Scorsese. Am I wrong for saying that? I mean, come on. So that does it for today. If you enjoy piecing it together, we would love to hear what you think of the show. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and also on Podchaser, which is a new social networking site for podcasts, and we've been getting that profile all set up and everything, and it's a really fun site, so come join us there and let us know how you like the show. And of course, you could also just follow us on social media at Piecing Pod on all of the major social media sites, and our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces. Along with that, we also have a Patreon, so if you really enjoy the show and would like to get some bonus content, which right now includes some advance episodes of the show that aren't out yet, but they will be out when the movie that they're about hits VOD. That's the thing. Sometimes we got so many episodes all at one time, we can't put them all out at the same time. So we end up holding on to some for the VOD release, and we've got a couple of those in the can waiting to get released. And right now they're up on the Patreon. So if you want to listen to them early, go check that out. You could also pay a little extra and get my albums of music. I always end the show with one of my tracks. And if you want all the albums, the actual physical CDs, I will send them to you if you are a Patreon. So that is it for today. Thank you all so much for listening. This Thanksgiving week, we've got this one, and then coming up on Friday, we've got Knives Out. It's a big week for the podcast, and seriously, thank you all out there so much. I really appreciate you all listening. It's just so awesome. I really, really appreciate it. So let's leave you with a piece of music like I always do, and I think for this movie, I don't really have anything anything like a mafia style or anything like that to go with this. And I don't really have anything oldies doo-wop to go with the score of The Irishman, which had a lot of that great classic doo-wop, which, by the way, make sure to check out Wax Trax Records if you like that kind of music. But anyway, I'm going to play something a little introspective, a little dark, a little, that kind of thing that maybe would go with the mindset of the character a little bit at the end, because that is what I do after all with my sad, depressing albums of instrumental dark music. But this is a track called Forgotten off the album An Unseen Sky. So enjoy it, and we'll be back, like I said, on Friday with Knives Out, which, by the way, go see this movie. It's so fucking good. I loved Knives Out, and I can't wait to talk about it. It's coming up on Friday.
and all points west.